Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the history of Mississippi. In this episode, we'll be discussing the period before Mississippi was incorporated as a state, but when it was a U.S. territory, and how the U.S. gained this territory. The United States government bought the territory in three parts. The U.S. bought the middle section in 1798. This section contained Natchez and St. Stephen from Alabama. The northern part was annexed in 1804 from Britain, and the last little southern tip was annexed in 1812. At first, Georgia claimed the entire region that now includes Alabama, Mississippi, and New Orleans. Thus, the state tried to sell land there, most notoriously in the Yazoo land scandal of 1795. For those curious, Yazoo lands refers to a central and western region of the state of Georgia, when its western border stretched back to the Mississippi. Imagine if Georgia was nearly as big as Texas. This term is named after the native tribe of the Yazoo, which is also where the Yazoo River gets its name from. Now, the Yazoo land scandal, also known as the Yazoo fraud, the Yazoo land fraud, or the Yazoo land controversy, was a massive real estate fraud perpetuated in the mid-1790s. The governor of Georgia, George Matthews, and Georgia General Assembly perpetuated this scandal. The scandal was caused by a desire of Georgia to firm up its territorial claims after the Revolutionary War. This territory was huge, as I've already stated. Now, this wasn't the first attempt of land speculation fraud. For example, in 1789, a secret society called the Combined Society was formed for a similar purpose, but it was exposed in 1792. But this one, the one we're discussing now, the Yazoo land fraud, occurred in Mississippi and was perpetuated by four new companies founded in 1794. These were the Georgia Company, the Georgia Mississippi Company, the Upper Mississippi Company, and the New Tennessee Company. They attempted to sell over 40 million acres of land. Governor George Matthews signed this in a bill known as the Yazoo Act. Now, when the details of the sale were revealed, public outcry was widespread and led to numerous events. First, when Jared Irwin was elected, he signed a bill on February 13, 1796 that nullified the Yazoo Act, known as the 1796 Rescinding Act. He even went as far as to burn all copies of the bill except for the one sent to George Washington, who was president at the time. In 1802, the state ceded to the federal government all lands west of its present border in the Compact of 1802. Now, this was in the end to legal challenges, and these challenges led to the landmark decision of Fletcher v. Peck, which ruled that protected property rights against popular pressures, and this is the earliest case of the court asserting its right to invalidate state laws which are in conflict to or contrary to the Constitution. Despite this case, claims of innocent ownership were not fully resolved until 1816, and unfortunately for Native Americans, claims were pretty much extinguished by the end of the 1820s, indicating once again Native Americans have suffered great mistreatment. Now, this territory owned by the federal government became the Mississippi Territory. Now, territories became a state after its officers petitioned Congress for an enabling act, established a constitution, and met certain requirements, often regarding population, as set forth by the U.S. Congress. Congress itself may initiate such an action, though, in spite of it. Now, the Mississippi Territory attracted many settlers relatively quickly due to its rich soils that offered vast amounts of high quality cotton. Mostly these settlers came from Georgia and the Carolinas in roughly two waves. The first was a steady movement until the outbreak of the War of 1812, and a secondary flood from 1815 through the beginning of statehood. This flood was caused by several factors such as new and improved roads and the acquisition of new direct routes to the Gulf de Mexico. The Mississippi Territory was looked over by a series of four territorial governors before earning its statehood. In order, these are Winthrop Sargent, George Matthews, Robert Williams, and lastly David Holmes, who would go on to be the first governor of the state of Mississippi until ill health forced him to resign. Don't worry, we'll be discussing him in the next episode. The first governor, Winthrop Sargent, imposed the first laws in what would become Mississippi. Based on English common law, this Sargent's Code was considered by the citizenry to be repressive and unconstitutional, for he was the first of many exploitative Yankees, or at least in their view. Despite this, Sargent's Code, though in a modified form, persisted into the future and would serve to form the state's constitution. With regards to religion, the Catholic Church was extremely popular amongst the coast, having been established by French colonists among their colonial coastal settlements, such as Biloxi. As Americans settled the region, the more inland areas became heavily Protestant, with sects like Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians growing rapidly. Now, many people think that religion is inherently a bad thing, but the Protestants often promoted education and would often call upon improved treatment for the enslaved, which were a large portion. Well, now, it's time to discuss it, for we must. Slavery. African slaves were sold by other Africans to Europeans and were forced to pick cotton. Set cotton was a new type called short-stapled cotton. This type grew more readily in upland and inland areas and became the dominant form in contrast to the more sensitive, long-stapled cotton. This combined with cotton gin invention allowed slavery to expand, and slavery was brutal, horribly brutal. Perhaps one of the biggest events during Mississippi's territorial period was the War of 1812. This war was between the United States of America and their allies and Britain and its allies, which included Bourbon Spain. This war was caused by British blockading America in order to hurt Napoleon, and they used their naval blockade to choke off trade with France. And they would also often impress American sailors illegally to join their navy. In this war, the only losers were really the Indians, for they lost nearly all their claims. Mississippi became a state in 1817 when elected delegates wrote a constitution and applied to Congress for statehood. On December 10, 1817, the western portion of the Mississippi Territory became the state of Mississippi, the 20th state of the Union. Natchez was the first state capital until it was changed to Jackson as more population came into the northern region of the state in 1822. This left the eastern half to become the Alabama Territory for a measly 2 years until becoming incorporated as the state of Alabama. So yes, Mississippi did beat Alabama. This era of Mississippi history saw the dawn of the era of good feelings, the collapse of the Federal Party, and the beginning of James Monroe presidency, which we'll discuss what happens next in the next episode of The History of Mississippi.